Hey, bio team. So living things need energy in order to function, and their main source of energy comes from carbohydrates, or sugars. Now, most sugars are made by the organisms at the bottom of the food chain, autotrophs. So this would be things like plants doing photosynthesis, or in some environments at the bottom of the ocean without light, uh, being made by bacteria that can do chemosynthesis. That is, they can turn chemicals into sugar. And after these autotrophs make sugar, stuff like us, heterotrophs, will eat the autotrophs to get food from them. We'll take the sugar that they've made. But in either case, autotrophs or heterotrophs, we all use the sugar to power our cellular processes through the process of respiration. And you can see the process of respiration in this diagram down here. We've got relatively unstable reactants. The sugar molecule has very high potential energy. It takes a little bit of energy to break the sugar apart, but then when we reform the sugar into products, we release energy. And since respiration is converting sugar into products that are more stable than the reactants, overall this reaction is exergonic. It releases energy overall. Now, carbohydrates can be divided into simple carbohydrates like monosaccharides or disaccharides, literally just clumps of one or two sugar molecules, or complex carbohydrates, polysaccharides, which just literally means long strands of many sugars. So you can see some examples of monosaccharides and disaccharides down here. You'll notice that they all end in the suffix "-ose. And then you can see some examples of polysaccharides over here. But in both cases, you'll notice that even though the size of these molecules is different, the ratio of carbon to hydrogen and oxygen is approximately the same, approximately 1 carbon for every 2 hydrogen for every 1 oxygen. Now, simple carbs are great for short-term energy. Break apart these bonds, reform them into something more stable. You can recharge some ATP with it. Whereas more complex sugars get used for longer-term energy storage. So for instance, glycogen in humans, same with starch in plants. Now when we say that these molecules can provide long-term energy storage, there's a catch to this. In humans, polysaccharides are relatively heavy molecules, and so it's inefficient for us to store a lot of energy in the form of glycogen. So what we can do is we can use enzymes to convert carbohydrates into lipids or fats, which are a more efficient way of storing energy. And you can see some examples of lipids down here. The main monomer of a lipid is a fatty acid, but what you'll notice is that there is a very high density in fatty acid of hydrogen-carbon bonds. Each fatty acid has this tail made up of a hydrocarbon. So very concentrated energy stored in each one of these tails. And then there's an acid group at the head of the fatty acid, specifically carboxyl. And so fatty acids will often clump into groups of 3 called triglycerides, which is just a glycerol molecule bonding together 3 fatty acid tails. But in either case, the main use of lipids then is for long-term energy storage. But there's some other uses too. Lipids make for great membranes, and we'll bring up a diagram of a membrane here. Because lipids are nonpolar, they don't get dissolved by water, and so a cell membrane is actually made up of a bilayer of phospholipids. Each phospholipid has a hydrophilic head, which is attracted to the water in the cytoplasm, but it has a fatty acid tail, a lipid tail, that doesn't get dissolved by the water and allows the membrane to retain its shape. The fact that lipids are nonpolar also makes them good messengers or hormones in the body because they're able to slip through the cell membrane. Polar molecules, when they try to get through the lipid bilayer, they end up attracting to these polar phosphate heads, and you can see this slightly positive polar molecule is stuck trying to cross through the phospholipid bilayer. Whereas a lipid steroid is able to slip through the cell membrane because it's nonpolar, it doesn't have charges to it, and so it won't attract or get stuck to the phosphate heads when it's trying to cross through the lipid bilayer. And last, lipids And fats like blubber are good insulators. They're able to keep in body heat. And that's it. At this point, you guys have some practice problems. We'll see you next class.